It was only a small detail, almost easy to miss, and yet it quickly became the one thing so many people could not stop talking about. As the Princess of Wales arrived at Evelina London Children's Hospital for an important engagement, many royal watchers were first drawn not only to her composed appearance and calm manner, but also to what appeared to be a light graze on her leg, just below the knee. It was subtle, it was human, and in a royal world where every gesture, every glance, and every visible detail is so carefully noticed, it immediately prompted a wave of reaction. Some saw it as proof that Catherine remains as active and hands-on as ever. Others simply found it relatable. And perhaps that is what made the moment linger, because on a day that was really about children, care, compassion, and the future of specialist treatment, it was a tiny, almost ordinary imperfection that reminded the public of something they often feel strongly about when it comes to the Princess of Wales. Beneath the polish, beneath the titles, beneath the symbolism, there is still something strikingly grounded about her. Hello and welcome to Royal Report Today, UK. I'm Grace Windsor, and today we're looking at the Princess of Wales's latest visit to Evelina London Children's Hospital, the gentle public reaction to that now much-discussed grazed leg, and why this engagement matters far more than a passing visual detail. Because while the internet may briefly fixate on a scuff, a wardrobe choice, or a fleeting expression, this visit actually tells us something much bigger about Catherine's role, her public image, and the kind of royal work she continues to build around children, healthcare, and long-term support for families. The Princess of Wales stepped out in London to visit Evelina London Children's Hospital, where she met children, families, and members of staff, and learned more about the hospital's evolving services. The visit also drew attention to the hospital's future plans and to a broader collaboration involving children's cancer care. This was not simply a smiling walkabout or a routine photo opportunity. It was very clearly one of those engagements that sits closely within Catherine's long-established area of interest, the well-being of children and the conditions that shape their lives from the earliest years onward. She has been patron of Evelina London since 2018, and over time, her association with organizations like this has helped create one of the clearest themes in her public work. That theme is not spectacle. It is development, support, family life, emotional resilience, and the long-term health of children. And so, while it is true that one of the talking points of the day became the small graze visible on her leg as the fabric of her dress moved in the wind, it is equally true that the real significance of the visit lies elsewhere. The princess was there to listen, to learn, to encourage, and to lend profile and momentum to a hospital that cares for children and young people across South London and the wider southeast of England. There is something particularly fitting about Catherine in this environment. Hospital engagements can sometimes appear formal or overmanaged, but with her, there is often a sense of warmth that feels natural rather than performed. She tends to lean in, to listen carefully, to speak gently to children at their level, and to bring a certain calm into spaces that are, by their very nature, emotionally complex. What made the public reaction so interesting, however, was the way that a tiny detail on her leg seemed to trigger exactly the same kind of response from so many people. Not shock, not scandal, not outrage, but affection. A sense of, there she is, looking immaculate as always, and yet still clearly living a real life. It is a dynamic Catherine has embodied for years now. She is glamorous, yes. She is disciplined, polished, and careful. But she is also often perceived as practical, outdoorsy, active, and deeply involved with her family. So when a small mark appears, rather than damaging the image, it can almost enhance it. It reinforces the idea that she is not frozen inside formality. She is moving, doing, climbing, walking, bending down to speak to children, and perhaps, like anyone else, collecting the occasional scrape along the way. That relatability matters in modern monarchy far more than it once did. The public no longer responds only to grandeur. In fact, there are moments when grandeur can create distance. What people respond to now, especially with younger royals or senior figures who are expected to represent continuity with a more modern tone, is the balance between duty and recognizable humanity. Catherine has become exceptionally skilled at holding that balance. She rarely overshares. She almost never indulges in dramatic self-narration, and yet she repeatedly leaves the impression of someone who is emotionally intelligible to the public. People think they understand her. They may not know her personally, of course, but they recognize certain values in her presentation. Steadiness, family-mindedness, self-control, kindness, and a refusal to turn every moment into theater. On this occasion, her outfit only added to that impression. She wore a light-toned shirt dress with contrasting dark buttons and belt detailing, elegant but practical in the intense summer heat. It was the sort of choice that signaled poise without stiffness, effort without excess. Catherine's clothing is often discussed as fashion, and understandably so, but it also functions as visual messaging. For a hospital visit during soaring UK temperatures, she chose something polished, breathable, and unfussy, making her appear accessible while remaining unmistakably royal. Nothing about the look overwhelmed the purpose of the day, and that is one of the enduring strengths of her style. It almost always knows when to step back. Of course, part of what gives this visit extra emotional resonance is Catherine's own recent connection to serious medical settings. Following the difficult period that saw her withdraw from public duties, undergo treatment, and later return gradually to engagements, hospital visits now carry an added layer of meaning. Even when the purpose of the outing is focused entirely on patients and services, observers cannot help viewing these moments through the wider story of where she has been and what she has endured, privately and publicly. That does not mean every hospital visit should be framed around her own health journey. Indeed, it is often wiser not to make her the center of the narrative when the point is to highlight children and families. But equally, it would be naive to pretend the public doesn't read these appearances with a deeper emotional awareness now. There is a quiet authority that often comes from people who have moved through difficult health experiences and then re-enter professional life not with noise, but with measured purpose. Catherine increasingly gives that impression. She does not seem eager to dramatize recovery. She is not pushing a confessional style of monarchy. Instead, she appears to be integrating personal experience into a more serious, more grounded public presence. That can make visits like this feel especially authentic. She is not simply arriving as a royal patron in abstract terms. She is arriving as someone who likely understands, in a very real sense, the atmosphere of hospitals, the strain on families, the uncertainty that can accompany treatment, and the emotional importance of warmth from staff and visitors alike. And this is where the visit becomes especially meaningful. Evelina London is not just any institution. It is a major children's hospital with a significant role in specialist care, and its expansion plans are part of a broader story about healthcare infrastructure, demand, and future provision. Catherine's presence there shines a national spotlight on the hospital's work, on the experiences of young patients, and on the importance of integrated services that support not only treatment itself, but family well-being. Royal visits can sometimes be dismissed as ceremonial, but when done well, they amplify institutions that deserve greater visibility. They create attention, headlines, photographs, and perhaps most importantly, emotional connection. People who might otherwise scroll past a policy discussion about children's hospital services will stop and pay attention when the Princess of Wales is walking through a ward, speaking to children, or listening to staff explain what new facilities could mean. That is one of the monarchy's enduring practical uses when it is operating at its best. It can direct national attention towards serious work without making that work feel cold or bureaucratic. In Catherine's case, this is especially effective because children's development and health have become such clearly recognizable pillars of her public mission. For years, she has emphasized early years development, emotional foundations, and the impact of childhood conditions on later life. A visit like this, therefore, does not feel random. It fits into a coherent narrative. She is not hopping between causes for the sake of variety. She is building depth. And perhaps that depth is one reason the public tends to respond so favorably to her hospital visits. There is a difference between a royal briefly appearing somewhere and a royal appearing somewhere in a way that seems connected to an ongoing concern. With Catherine, the latter is often the case. Viewers and readers sense continuity. They feel she has returned not simply because a diary slot needed filling, but because this is work that matters to her image, her role, and perhaps, on some level, to her personally. Whether one is a devoted royal watcher or merely a casual observer, that consistency helps create trust. The moment with the grazed leg, meanwhile, sits almost as a footnote, and yet an oddly memorable one. There is something revealing about how quickly people notice such details with Catherine. It tells us not only that she is watched closely, but that the public has developed a highly textured reading of her appearances. They are not just seeing a princess in the abstract. They are reading for signs of energy, signs of confidence, signs of fatigue, signs of resilience, signs of emotion, and yes, even signs of ordinary life. A visible graze can become a talking point not because it is dramatic, but because it interrupts perfection very slightly. And in doing so, it often softens the image. It also reinforces another element of Catherine's persona that the palace has never needed to shout about, but which recurs again and again through stories, photographs, and offhand remarks. She is physically active. This is a woman who has repeatedly appeared comfortable in sports settings, outdoor settings, school visits, nature projects, family challenges, and practical, movement-based engagements. She is not presented as delicate. She is presented as capable. So, if a small scrape appears after weeks in which she has been visibly active, many people do not interpret it as mysterious in any sinister sense. They interpret it as exactly the kind of thing that happens to someone living fully rather than posing carefully. There is another layer here too, and it concerns the modern appetite for authenticity. The royal family exists in an environment shaped by social media, hypervisibility, and relentless image analysis. In such a world, absolute perfection can sometimes create suspicion or detachment. Tiny, unscripted details do the opposite. They remind audiences that the picture is not airbrushed into meaninglessness. They create small proof points of reality. In Catherine's case, reality tends to strengthen the brand rather than weaken it. A crease, a laugh, a spontaneous exchange with a child, a plaster on a finger, a graze below the knee. All of these things quietly support the sense that there is a real person beneath the careful royal presentation. That public perception has become especially valuable at a time when the monarchy continues to navigate generational transition, family tensions, health challenges, and constant media competition. Senior royals are no longer judged only by what they symbolize, but by how convincingly they inhabit the human dimension of public life. Catherine's popularity has often rested on her ability to appear stable without seeming remote. This visit captured that perfectly. She arrived looking every inch the future queen in bearing and presentation, but left people talking about a little graze and her gentle ease with children. In other words, she managed once again to combine symbolism with relatability. And we should pause for a moment on the children themselves, because they are, after all, the heart of this story. Hospital visits involving children can be some of the most affecting engagements a royal undertakes, precisely because there is no room for empty performance. Children respond honestly. Families facing serious health challenges are not interested in glittering theater. They notice warmth, patience, attentiveness, and whether someone truly takes time. Reports from these visits often reflect that Catherine has a particular ease in these environments, not in a loud or overly theatrical way, but in a quiet manner that allows children and parents to feel seen. That matters. It matters immensely. It also reflects something broader about how she has shaped her public role over time. In the early years, much of the conversation around Catherine focused on style, adjustment, symbolism, and expectation. Was she saying enough, doing enough, defining herself clearly enough? But over time, especially through her sustained focus on children and early years, she has gradually built a public identity that feels more substantive. She is still heavily watched through the lens of fashion and family, of course. That will never disappear. But there is now an underlying seriousness to her work that gives those lighter moments a stronger framework. So when the public notices her dress or that small graze, they are noticing it against the backdrop of a woman whose role now feels more fully formed. The timing of the visit is also worth considering. Summer engagements often carry a particular visual brightness, and this one unfolded during unusually high temperatures in the UK. Heat changes the atmosphere of public appearances. It affects pacing, wardrobe, energy, even the emotional texture of photographs. In this case, the warm weather may have heightened the sense of informality and immediacy around the outing. The movement of the dress in the wind, the visibility of the graze, the softness of the light-colored outfit, all of it combined to create an image that felt both composed and unguarded. Sometimes royal moments become memorable not because of a grand speech or constitutional significance, but because they produce a visual shorthand for how a figure is being understood at a particular time. This may be one of those moments for Catherine. There is also a subtle but important distinction between attention and exploitation when covering such stories. A channel like this, and indeed any serious royal commentary space, has to resist turning every minor visual detail into melodrama. It is perfectly reasonable to note that a graze was visible, that viewers noticed it, and that many found the moment humanizing. What would be less reasonable is to invent grand narratives around it without evidence. And perhaps that is part of why this story has resonated in a gentler way. There appears to be no major drama attached to it. It was simply there, visible for a moment, and because it belonged to someone so closely observed, it became a small public conversation. In many ways, that feels refreshingly ordinary. Ordinary, of course, is not a word often associated with the Princess of Wales, and yet it may be one of the key ingredients in her appeal. Not ordinary in status, certainly not ordinary in responsibility, but ordinary in instinct, in demeanor, in the details that leak through the formality. The public tends to reward royals who can suggest normality without diminishing the dignity of the institution. It is a delicate balancing act. Too much normality and the mystique evaporates. Too much distance and the public disconnects. Catherine generally lands in the sweet spot between the two. She still looks every inch the senior royal, but small moments like this remind people she is not made of marble. And for Royal Report Today UK, that is one of the most interesting things to observe about the Princess of Wales at this stage in her public life. She no longer feels like someone still proving whether she belongs in the role. She feels established, comfortable, not complacent, but settled. That settled quality allows the public to focus less on whether she can do the job and more on how she is choosing to shape it. Visits like this suggest she is shaping it around care, steadiness, long-term causes, and emotional credibility. The mystery, if there is one, is not really the graze. The mystery is how she manages, time and again, to generate so much discussion from such restrained appearances. No scandal, no grand reveal, no dramatic statement. And yet the photographs travel everywhere, the reactions pour in, and a hospital visit becomes one of the day's most talked about royal stories. Part of that is simply star power. Catherine remains one of the most watched women in the royal family. But part of it is also narrative discipline. She and her team rarely flood the public with too much. They allow space for people to look, interpret, and feel. In a media environment saturated with noise, restraint can be incredibly powerful. That restraint was visible again here. She came, she met children and families, she highlighted an important hospital and its future development, she brought attention to specialist care, and she did so without turning the day into a spectacle about herself. And yet, by the end of it, people were talking not only about the institution, but about her. That is the paradox of effective modern royalty. The best engagements are not those in which the royal vanishes completely into the background, nor those in which the royal overwhelms the cause. The best are those in which the presence of the royal draws attention to the cause while leaving behind an emotional afterglow that keeps the story alive. The grazed leg, then, may end up being remembered not because it mattered in itself, but because it became the tiny symbol around which a bigger public feeling crystallized. The feeling seemed to be this. Catherine looked calm, active, elegant, and unmistakably herself. She looked like someone continuing to step forward, continuing to work, continuing to show up in the places where empathy and visibility matter. And for many people, that was enough to prompt the same reaction all over again. Admiration not only for how she looked, but for how naturally she carried the moment. In royal reporting, the smallest detail often opens the door to the larger truth. And the larger truth here is not really about a mark on the skin. It is about the image of a future queen who has learned how to make seriousness look gentle, duty look natural, and public life feel, at least for a moment, unexpectedly human. On a hot day in London, inside a children's hospital filled with families facing challenges far greater than a passing scrape, Catherine brought attention, warmth, and calm.